Joined by Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer and Deputy Liberal Leader. Very good morning to you. Thank you for
joining me. Nice
joining
to be with you, David.
Let's start with the big announcement today, $4 billion for the East-West link. Where is that money coming from?
Well, this will be a contingent liability, contingent upon Daniel Andrews giving the approval for the project to go ahead, but we're not asking for a cent from the Victorian Labor government. They've made it clear that they don't prioritise this important project for the eastern suburbs of Melbourne.
Well, indeed, I'll come back to that.
And
so
it's
if they do give approval, does that mean it's off the bottom line as an investment? Or
if they give approval, this means that the money will then flow, and it's $4 billion from us.
But that doesn't come from the eat into the surplus, is what I'm saying.
Not right now, because it's contingent upon the approval from
but if
the
they
Andrews
give that
government.
approval.
But if they do, then obviously this is money that will flow from the Commonwealth. Now, the project itself...
But does that mean a smaller surplus?
Well, obviously it would mean that we'll continue to have major surpluses over the years and $45 billion over the forwards.
That's smaller surpluses because of this.
If this goes ahead, then it will be reduced by $4 billion over the years that actually the spending takes place. But it's a $7.6 billion project. We're saying that the Commonwealth will contribute $4 billion of that. We're not expecting a cent from the Andrews government. This is a priority infrastructure project for Victoria, as well as for Infrastructure Australia. And Victoria, unfortunately, is notorious for having spent $1.3 billion not to build a road, because Daniel Andrews broke that contract. Now, 3,700 jobs will be created. There will be 100,000 commuters on that road who will see their traffic congestion reduced significantly. 23 sets of traffic lights will be bypassed, and this will be a really important infrastructure reform.
$7 billion total cost, though.
Just over $7.
Right, $4 from the federal government, with the remaining
$3
from tolls on this new road. Okay. Now, just back on the budget impact, though, you're not finding savings elsewhere to pay for this? You're just going to eat into that surplus?
Well, look, we want this road to go ahead, and we're spending significantly on infrastructure. But you've got to understand we've got $45 billion worth of surpluses over the forward estimates.
They'd be $4 billion less, though.
But we're paying down government debt by the end of the decade.
Would it eat into next year's surplus at all?
Well, it's not going to be built next year.
Right.
Obviously,
so the cost is beyond next year.
And obviously, we want this project to go ahead, and it's a major priority project. Now, we see this as really important. We've taken it to a couple of elections that we've won in 2013
Just
and
on
2016.
that, at the state level, it's gone to a couple of elections as well and been defeated. I mean, in 2014, Prime Minister Tony Abbott said the state election in here in Victoria was a referendum on the East-West link, and voters rejected it.
And they've supported us at the federal level when we have taken this to the election. And again, this is a priority project. Bill Shorten himself, David, supported this project. He said it was vitally important for Victoria. We needed more east-west links. That's what he said. And now the Labor Party has walked away from the people of Victoria who would use this new infrastructure project, and it complements all the other funding that we are doing in this state, like the airport rail link, which we've put $5 billion down, and the fast rail from Melbourne to Geelong.
Bill Shorten today is promising $10 billion for the suburban underground rail loop. Why is road spending a better idea than rail spending right now?
Well, as you know, we put $2 billion in the budget for fast rail between Melbourne and Geelong. But I'd say to you and to the Labor Party, Bill Shorten just put out his costings last week. Made a big fanfare about his costings, and we can go through why that was such a con job. But where was the $10 billion that he's announced today? I mean, less than 72 hours after announcing his costings, there's a $10 billion black hole on top of the $180 billion black hole for the other things that he didn't properly fund.
But hang on.
So the reality is he has not properly explained.
You've just acknowledged your budget doesn't include what you're announcing today.
But we've made it very clear that's a contingent liability. We haven't heard from Bill Shorten where his $10 billion is coming from.
No, but your budget didn't include any money for this East-West link that you're announcing today. Bill Shorten presumably is making a commitment here that he would fund in later budgets.
Let's wait and see. But where's his $10 billion coming from?
Just on the economic and budget outlook, the Reserve Bank on Friday, in its quarterly update, did seem to cast a bit of doubt over some of the budget projections on economic growth and wages growth. The Reserve Bank says the economy will now grow by only 2.5% next year, compared to the 2.75% in your budget just a few weeks ago. Who's right, you or the Reserve Bank?
Well, actually, look more closely, David, at what the Reserve Bank says against what it was in our budget numbers. So for 18-19, the RBA numbers and our budget numbers are the same.
I'm asking for 19-20.
Yes, for 19-20, it's only 1/4 percentage point lower than what was in our budget, and for 2021, it's the same.
But you're saying now, 1/4% in economic growth will have little impact?
But then I could also say to you, if you look at the RBA's most recent numbers on unemployment, that we have it at 5% in 18-19, 19-20 and 2021.
But I'm just asking about economic growth.
But the point is here that the RBA is saying unemployment will even be lower than what we've put in the budget. So it's slightly swings and roundabouts here. The differences are not major. The underlying fundamentals of the Australian economy is strong. We're campaigning on our economic record, which is more than 1.3 million new jobs, a record number of young people who are in the workforce, a record number of women who are in the workforce.
Okay, to be clear, do you still think the economy will grow by 2.75% next year? You disagree with the Reserve Bank on that?
Well, that's our budget number and we stick by it, and it was reaffirmed in the pre-election fiscal outlook.
You said on Friday when Labor released its costings that there was a black hole. Where is the black hole?
Well, if you combine what their promises are on Newstart, what their promises are on aid, what their promises
What's their promise on Newstart?
Well, they've said talking about $75 a week extra, and that's an ACTU demand. That's
an ACTU. Labor have said they'd look at Newstart.
Well, actually, to be fair, Bill Shorten said Newstart needs to rise.
So has Arthur Sinodinos.
Right, but I'm talking about what Bill Shorten has said. Right, Bill Shorten has made it clear as the leader of the opposition, the alternative Prime Minister of this country, said Newstart needs to rise, will rise, basically is what he's saying.
Well, he's saying he'll review it, and he's indicated he'll lift it.
But you see, this is the false hope that the Labor Party is giving the Australian people. They're saying, OK, on aid, we're going to go to 0.5% of GNI. On Newstart, we're going to be favourably disposed to increasing it, and $75 a week is the demand. On R&D, you've got their shadow Minister, Kim Carr, talking about 3% of GDP. You add up those three things alone, and it's an extra $180 billion, $160 billion.
But are you therefore saying the government rules out looking at Newstart at all in the next term of Parliament?
I've been asked numerous times about Newstart, and I've made two particular points about it. The first is 99% of people who are on Newstart are on other payments. Right? And the second point is 2/3 of people are going off Newstart within 12 months, and they're going into a job.
But I'm just asking, do you rule out looking at Newstart at all?
Well, we've made it very clear what's going to be increased in our budget. Our numbers are very clear there. But
do you rule out looking at Newstart at all?
But what we have said is we're not increasing Newstart. The Labor Party have given false hope to people by not providing the detail and the funding in their costings.
What about things like cancer? I mean, the Prime Minister has said during this campaign a number of times that you would look at more money for cancer care.
We actually are delivering more money for cancer care.
Shouldn't that be in your budget bottom line?
Well, Bill Shorten has been very specific on those issues. When I was talking about R&D, when I was talking about
But isn't it the same as him saying, we'll look at Newstart? Scott Morrison says, we'll look at cancer. If there's a black hole on the Labor side, on those grounds, surely there's a black hole on your side.
No, not at all. And in fact, you could extend that list to things like hospital funding, where they talked about going to 50-50. You could extend it to their childcare wages promise. I mean, they've allocated $10 billion of your money and mine, taxpayers' money, to fund private sector wages. Now, they've said that will be a 20% increase for the childcare workers. But they've based their numbers on 100,000 childcare workers, and as you and I know, there are 200,000 childcare workers. So which childcare workers are going to miss out, and what will happen after 8 years' time? Will the Commonwealth be on the hook?
Will any childcare workers be better off under you?
Absolutely, because we're going to see wages growth. What we're going to continue to see is strong labour market performance. And the fact is, when we came to government, unemployment was 5.7%. Today, it's 5%. When we came to government, growth was lower than it is today. When we came to government, investment was weaker than it is today. Our economic record of strong jobs growth and lower taxes is the record that we're standing on, and our economic plan for the next decade was set out in the budget.
Bottom line, Labor's costings do show they'll be able to retire debt a lot faster than you. Is that not a good thing?
And pigs might fly. pigs might fly, David. I mean, are you serious when you put that question to me?
Well, you've spent this whole campaign saying they're going to increase taxes by $387
and they
million.
admit that in their costings.
So, ipso facto, that is a lot of it going to help retire debt.
Well, can I explain to you
You don't believe that?
Well, can I explain to you what happens when you increase people's taxes? You change their economic behaviour. So you rip $57 billion out of hard-working retirees, people who've worked for their whole life to save for their retirement. You're going to reduce their discretionary spending. You increase capital gains tax by 50% and abolish negative gearing as we know it, and you increase people's rents right across the board and decrease the value of their home. You will impact upon consumer confidence and what they go out and do in terms of build houses. Well, we've seen independent modelling from the Centre for International Economics talk about the multi-billion-dollar detrimental impact of just a simple increase on capital gains tax, not to mention what they're doing on superannuation with higher taxes, not to mention what they're doing on retirees, not to mention what they're doing with income tax earners. And don't forget, Paul Keating, you know, he was heralded at the Labor Party National Conference. Paul Keating said Labor's plans for increasing the income tax was too punitive and that the Labor Party has lost the ability to speak to aspirational Australians. Now, this is the key difference at this election. We are increasing funding for schools, for hospitals, for roads. We are paying back Labor's debt. Howard and Costello left them with zero government debt. We're paying back Labor's debt and we're lowering taxes for millions of Australians, all without increasing people's taxes, which Bill Shorten and Chris Bowen can't say.
I'm just wondering, how do oppositions get around this? We've got this Parliamentary Budget Office now, which is meant to take, you know, some of this argument away and have an independent authority that runs the ruler over all the promises. They've done that, plus an eminent panel of accountants and retired public servants and so on. And yet you say pigs might fly about their numbers. What's an opposition meant to do?
Well, because what they have failed to do in their costings is to explain and to model the economic impact of their higher taxes. So I'll give you a few examples. With retirees tax, you've actually heard from the thousands of retirees who've turned up at the parliamentary inquiry that some of them will be pushed onto the pension. Now, what is the impact on the public purse of that?
You don't think that's been factored in the assumptions?
It absolutely hasn't. What about family businesses? Labor is whacking taxes on family businesses. Which ones are going to close? When it comes to increasing capital gains tax, more expensive now to buy a share and more expensive now to buy an investment property. We've heard from the Master Builders Association that Labor's plans on housing will lead to 32,000 fewer jobs and 42,000 fewer dwellings being built. What is the broader economic impact of all of that?
A couple of quick ones. Kooyong, you're facing a tough fight in your own seat of Kooyong. How confident are you at the moment about holding on?
Well, I'm not complacent, and I certainly don't take my seat for granted, nor do we take any seat for granted. The fact is, the Kooyong contest is tight, like many contests across the state. But I have worked hard to deliver for my community. We'll continue to do so with investments in infrastructure, with investments in community.
What do you think the biggest issue is in your seat?
I think the biggest issue is cost of living, and followed by congestion, and climate change in the environment is also.
So climate change is a big issue?
It is a big issue, absolutely.
What do you say to those in your seat who are concerned about things like the Adani mine? Do you support Adani?
Well, I've said if it goes through all the approvals, then it goes ahead.
Do you want to see it happen?
Well, I'm not against coal mining. I mean,
this project
and resources project. Well, I've said that publicly in the past about Adani, that we have put the most rigorous environmental processes and procedures in place, and it has gone through that process, that arduous process. There's still a few approvals to be given, but our resources projects, whether they're coal or iron ore or gold or whatever the case may be, create thousands of jobs across regional Australia.
Would you also like to see this coal-fired power station built in Queensland?
Well, obviously that is going to be an economic decision that will be taken about future power station needs. Now, what we have said
It'll be a political decision
but
too.
These are decisions that will stand up on the economics.
But the government has to decide whether to underwrite it.
Well, we've actually explained what we're going to be underwriting, David, as you know, and they're predominantly renewable and pumped hydro.
But there's this coal-fired power station too. That's on the list.
No, there's one for I think it's 26 megawatts, which is very small. But in terms, if you're talking about the review, it's quite a different thing. Now, what that is not a review into a coal-fired power station. It's actually a review into what is the baseload power needs in that part of Queensland. And having been the Environment and Energy Minister...
I thought it was looking specifically at a coal-fired
Well,
power station.
it's looking at the whole suite of options.
It may not be a coal-fired power station.
We've got to see what the business case shows.
This is the Collinsville project we're talking about.
Yeah.
You're saying it may not be a coal-fired power station.
Who knows what the business case... You and I don't know what it's going to be. But the reality is this, that with energy and climate, those two major issues, there is a transition underway in our energy sector. But what we won't do as a coalition is compromise people's energy bills. Now, we're 8 days from the election, or 7 days from the election, and Bill Shorten still hasn't explained the true cost of his climate policies. And that is something that he should be on the sticky paper for, because the impact on businesses is quite immense.
Fair enough. But on your side, you've got some of your Queensland colleagues cheering about this new coal-fired power station they reckon is going to be built in Collinsville. You're now saying it may not be a coal-fired power station.
Our position has been very clear. Let's have this study. Let's see what the power needs are for the area. Let's work out what the most cost-effective way, and let the market then proceed from there.
The government, to be clear, the government plays a role in this decision.
Well, the market will absolutely determine
so the
what is
government
going
will
to
have
be
nothing
needed.
to do with this.
Well, let's wait and see for the business case, David. But my point is this, is that we as a government, right, want to see lower power bills. What we won't do is we won't compromise people's power bills with recklessly high targets. And that is the difference. Now, going into this election, you've got Tomago aluminium smelter, which employs around 1,000 or plus blue-collar workers, probably Australia's biggest single electricity user, and they say we don't know the full details from Bill Shorten.
Final one, Josh Frydenberg. The coalition campaign launch, we know Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull aren't here for various reasons, but John Howard too, and he's your old boss. This will be the first campaign launch he hasn't been in decades, I'm guessing.
I think he's on the campaign trail right now. I mean,
he's back in the country, absolutely. But was he invited to come today?
Well, look, the focus here is on the future. And that Scott Morrison, as the Prime Minister, the leader of our party, someone who's campaigned very, very strongly, is the future. And I'm very proud to be his deputy, and we've got a very strong team. And that team, for those who aren't on the hustings today, that team will be here today. It's about the future. Now, Bill Shorten can wheel out Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, but that just reminds us...
Tony Abbott's the past, isn't
That just reminds everyone... Well, no, he's a candidate, and he's out there on the hustings in his own electorate, and we're backing him in. But the point is, you've got the Labor Party that were wheeling out people like Keating and Gillard and Rudd, people who all lost office, people who remind the Australian people of some of the things that went wrong.
At least they could be pictured together in the same room. Do you think some of your former Prime Ministers could right now?
I think that was a false picture of harmony on the Labor side. But let me make it very clear, David. Yeah. Today is about the future. Scott Morrison will be mapping out the reasons why Australians should be backing us at this election, based on our economic record, based on our economic plan, but most of all, what we can deliver for the Australian people to make their lives better. Bill Shorten, with his $387 billion of higher taxes, will only mean more taxes, more spending, a weaker economy, and worse outcomes for the Australian people.
Treasurer and Deputy Liberal Leader Josh Frydenberg, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you.
Look forward to seeing you in there at the campaign launch in a few hours from now. All right, let's bring in Paul.